Okay. Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is NACAA 365. Today we have a two-part series on farm succession. My name is Tyrone Fisher. I am your vice president, and I'm going to turn it over to Nathan Hulinsky from Minnesota Extension, and the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll go from there. So, hello everyone. Thank you, Tyrone, for introducing me. This is a two-part series. So today is day one. Day two is in a couple weeks. I don't have the date on top of my head here, but we got about 45 minutes of stuff here talking about farm succession planning. So what we mean by this is planning for the next generation to take over the farm, to run the farm business. And typically it's parents to children. I've worked with farm families where it's, parents to nieces or nephews or cousins. It's typically a family member, but not always. I've worked with farm families where they're transferring the farm to a neighbor kid who helped out at the farm, through high school and college, and he had a passion for it, and he wanted to take over the farm rolling forward. My contact information is on the screen here. I just want to highlight I am with the University of Minnesota, and feel free to send me an email if you have future questions down the road here. But we'll get started talking about farm transition. So we have a lot of factors to consider, right? I mean, we have some fun graphics on the screen here, but we have the younger generation, right? The younger generation, they have most oftentimes gone to college, got a 2, 4, 6 year degree in the farming world, and they have new ideas, new strategies that they want to use and implement on the farm moving forward. And then in the other corner on the screen here, we have the older generation, and we want to make sure that we have, appropriate communication and sharing of those ideas between the younger generation's new ideas and the older generation's kind of willingness to let go control and implement new change. I've worked with a lot of farm families, and the older generation is very resistant to change. They're like, I've been doing this same thing for 20 years and it's been working well. I ain't changing. Right? Where maybe the incoming generation has different ideas. We need to take them into account. Always doing the same thing isn't always what everybody wants to do. So, how can we find improvements, and making sure that we're okay with that is appropriate and needs to be considered. The other thing here is, we got the beautiful checklist and dollar sign business planning, right? The farm is a business. The whole point of farming is to support the family and make adequate income to make a living, right? Like I work for the University of Minnesota. That's my income stream on the farm business, selling corn, soybeans, milk, cattle, hogs, whatever they're growing. That is their business. And we need to run it like a business and not run it like a hobby or run it like a family enterprise that we're just in it to love each other. I love my family, but we also need to be making money. Otherwise, this farm is not going to continue into the long term. The next thing here, housing. I grew up on a dairy farm, and my house that I grew up in and the dairy barn were probably about 100 yards apart. Okay? So when my brother, right, the next generation from my parents wants to come in and take over that farm business, who's going to live where? Right? A lot of times on livestock farms, it's pretty important for the active farming member to be close to the animals, right? They need to be checked on a multiple daily basis. So we can't be living 30, 40 miles away. Having a 1 hour commute on the farming industry is pretty inconvenient. So we want to make sure we have housing that is nearby. Are the older generation going to, build their retirement home off the farm and down the road? Are they going to stay in the farmhouse and the next generation has to figure it out on their own? And unfortunately, we're all familiar, housing costs have not decreased, And housing costs have gotten expensive. So we need to make sure we think about the financing of housing as well. And then the bottom one there, here, the microphone, communication, right? We need to be having appropriate, regular, consistent communication between both the younger generation, the older generation, and also as I progress on in about a half hour here, we're going to be talking about some of the off-farm heirs. So the non-farming family members, they may be want to kept in on the loop on who owns the land, right? Like I grew up on the farm. What's going on there? Who owns it? Are we selling it? Or we have family members who use the farm shop to do regular maintenance on their other projects. If they're working on a car, they're working on building a wood structure, whatever it is. Maybe if now someone else owns it, not the parents, they don't have free range of using that, farm shop to work on their projects, right? So we just need to have this open communication with employees, owners, and other family members that are involved with this farming enterprise. And then that bottom, the one there, different ideas, right? We just need to talk about ideas and new strategies, or just what do we want to do moving forward. Reasons for failure. We have, and probably most people on the call here have heard some horror stories of the farm transition planning that didn't go well, where mom and dad died unexpectedly. They die without a will, and the children found out when they read the will on who got the farm. And if they don't think that was an appropriate distribution of assets, a lot of times we can have disagreements, complaints, not getting together at Christmas time with the family because there's just this, holding of grudges where we said, oh, dad treated you better than me, now I hate you, right? We want to prevent that, right? We have this quote here, failing to plan is planning to fail, right? We need to have adequate planning in place. And I have some statistics here on my screen that say 68% of Americans die without a will. So that's kind of alarming when that's, 2/3 of our American citizens die without a will. And if you die without a will, who gets to decide what happens? Right? Typically, it's like the court system. It goes through probate process, and a judge in your county is going to say, hey, we're going to divide your assets X, Y, Z. I think you know your family better than the county judge, right? So you need to take some action here and start drafting some of these wills or start making a plan of what you want to look like, what you want this to look like moving forward. I do encourage everybody to have a will, and there is some professionals in like the estate planning industry that pretty much say as soon as you have children, you need to have a will in place on what you want, who you want to be, the caretaker of your young child if you pass on unexpectedly. So yeah, 64% of farmers die without a will, right? 68% for the general population. So farmers are a little bit better, but that's over half, right? Over half of farmers die without a will, and it's just not a great situation because when we don't have a will, that's when it gets really complicated on what is going to happen with these assets. Again, you as a farm family and people on the call who are working with farm families, the families know what they want to have happen more so than the, county court system. And then the other thing we have to talk about is 73% of farmers never plan to retire. These statistics vary by different surveys, but if we have, almost 3/4 of farmers say, hey, I never want to retire. That's really hard for that next generation to come in and take management responsibilities when you are unwilling to step back. So again, when we work with farm families, we need to highlight this. Hey, we need to let go of some of this management control so that the next generation feels like they have a say in the farm business. And it's not this that we're going to be dad's employee until the day he dies. Right? I did a farm transfer workshop yesterday, and I shared a story about a farm family that I didn't personally work with, but I was told this story that we had a 70-year-old guy, and he was at the workshop. And he's like, how do I get my dad, who is 93, willing to let go control? Right? At that point, that's pretty tough, right? When you're 70 years old, you probably shouldn't start getting access to assets and management control. You should be thinking about relinquishing that to your children and the next generation. So we really need to be proactive here. And we have different business components, right? Labor, the physical work involved, right? Farming is a labor intensive industry where we need to make sure that the work gets done. And once we get, 55, 60, 65, some people's bodies start feeling the toll of working on the farm their entire life and they need to relinquish some of the labor. So, what's that next generation's labor uptake going to look like? And then a big one, income, right? Income is, expenses minus income equals profit, right? We need to make sure that we're paying our people. And if we have the next generation, right, let's say he's 30 years old coming back to the farm to take it over, what's his income going to look like? Right? Are we going to pay him an hourly wage for 5 years and then it's going to transition into a percentage of total farm income? What's that look like? What's that transition process of the income increases over time? And then management, again, the decision-making authority. That's really what is making you a business owner or a business runner, right? It's easy to go out and plant corn and soybeans. It's not as easy to do the management decisions of what varieties of seed am I going to buy? When am I going to spray? When am I going to harvest? When am I going to sell? Right? Farmers don't make any money until they sell their crops. What dates am I going to sell at? What's my grain marketing plan, my animal marketing plan, whatever that looks like? The decision making authority is really what runs the business, and that leads to the higher incomes that make the farms more successful. And then the last thing on the table here is asset ownership, right? And that's just simply owning the assets. All too often, when we are talking with farm families on the farm transition, they jump right back right first to the last bullet point about how do I get asset ownership? And that's a very important discussion, but we need to talk about transferring the labor, income, and management before we start selling assets to our son, daughter, niece, nephew, whoever this next generation is. They need to be able to run the business properly. We need to transfer the management. We need to mentor the next generation before we give them the keys to the kingdom. All right, I worked with farm families where the farm was paid off. It was somewhat successful. The farmer gave everything to his son. After 5 years, the son was a poor manager of the farm. He lost everything, right? He took out second mortgages on the farm property, wasn't making adequate loan payments. The bank came in and forced a sale, right? They lost everything because of poor management, and the asset transfer happened too quickly. So bear that in mind, the process of labor, income management, and then ownership, right? We call it the limo or the lima, right? LIMIA or O. So this an acronym I think can be helpful. And just kind of why the generation succession is important. We have this very simplistic business lifestyle graph, right? Where we start at the bottom left, we're starting the business, right? We don't have many acres, we don't have many sales, but over time, right, we increase our size of farm. We've become more successful. Maybe we're paying down some of the debt, right? We start to grow, we protect and defend our business, and then we get to a maturity phase, right? Maybe this is when the owner is starting to think about retirement. They don't want to take on a bunch of new debt. They don't want to expand in a crazy big way. They're like, you know what? I'm happy with the size of business I have, so we're going to kind of slow down. Okay? The second generation has the same mindset there. So the idea is we want these to kind of merge together. And with the successful farm business, we can have these kind of graphs of business lifestyle growth jump on each other. So the second generation, the third, fourth generation farms can just grow and make this business more successful because of their parents, grandparents, the older generation's success that we can build upon. So that's why this generational transfer is so important. I remember I was at a workshop and there's a gentleman from the New England area. I think it was the state of Massachusetts, and he worked with a farm family, 13 generations that farmer was. I live in Minnesota. We didn't have a very robust farming cycle 13 generations ago, so it was pretty surprising to me, right? So some of these have found this to be very successful, and a lot of the larger, productive, efficient farms that we all work with on this call today have had successful farm transitions that have been able to make them grow, right? If you can take the land base that your dad and grandpa kind of established and helped to get into your farm business, it's a lot better off than if you're starting at the bottom left corner, right? So that's why this is important. And with that, the first thing that families need to do here is to identify their goals. What do they want to have happen with the farm? Typically, the overarching goals that farm families that I work with state is they want the farm to continue. That's typically the number one goal, right? They want this farm to continue. They don't want to be the last generation running the farm. They're like, oh, great grandpa started this in 1905. I can't be the last man to farm it. So that's why goals are important and determining what's the most important thing, right? Is it I want to be the largest acreage farm in the county, right? Where we're always having this expansion mindset? Is it that I want to pay down my debt and I want to be profitable and have, a kind of a flexible work schedule, not be working 100 hours a week? Right? Those are different goals from one another, and we need to know what they are, right? So goals are statements of where, right? Where are you now? Where do you want to be, right? I own 200 acres today. In 5 years, I want to expand that and buy another 200 acres, right? How? How do you realistically intend to get there? Right? If we want to buy things, all right, where's the money coming from? Have we had very successful years where we have, hey, we made $200,000 of net farm income last year? We can't afford to buy new acreage, buy a new tractor, whatever you want to do. Otherwise, we need to go talk with the bank. If we want to buy assets, all right, we got to talk with the bank. We need to do some borrowing from the USDA to expand our business, right? And then when? What's the timeline? If you want to say, I want to grow the business, okay, does that mean next year? Does that mean in 20 years, right? We need to be very specific with these goals in order to make them a reality. And we do recommend writing them down. When I do these workshops with Minnesota farmers, we give them goal worksheets and we stop talking and say, write goals down, right? We usually have three worksheets, each with two sections. The first one is, what are your individual goals, right? You as a person, what do you want to do, both personal and with the farm business, right? The second worksheet is, what about you and your spouse or you and your brother, right? The same generation. What are your personal goals? What are your business goals? And then the third one is, what's the whole family? So we're bringing in both generation. What are the personal goals and business goals, and prioritize them, right? What is the number one overarching goal? Because different family members can have conflicting goals with each other, and we need to get that sorted out. And I do highlight, right, writing down these goals here, it gives them more authority, right? There's all kinds of academic research here that says writing down your goals makes it like 5 to 10 times more likely that it'll actually happen. It also reminds us of them. If you read some like professional development books or like some business, like CEO, like how to be the best CEO books, they'll say write down your goals and put them on the fridge or like your mirror so you see them every single day. Every day when you grab your sandwich from the fridge, it says, hey, my goal was to buy another 40 acres in the next, 12 months, whatever that goal is. Clarifies them from everyone. I just highlighted we can have conflicting goals in the same family. If you don't tell your dad, your wife, your children what your goals are, it's really tough for them to help you accomplish your goals because they don't know what they need to help you with. And sharing your goals with other people makes them accountable to you, and you have more likelihood of getting them down. And then provides a written record. I recommend when you write down your goals, put a date. Say, hey, today is January 28th. I said I wanted to, write my will before springtime. I wanted to, again, go to the bank and talk to the lender about how much I can borrow to buy a tractor, expand the barn, buy new acres, right? Whatever it is that our goals are, understanding steps that we need to do to get that goal accomplished is very important. And then just writing them down increases the probability of achievement. We always talk about long-term and short-term goals, right? If you want to buy, if your goal is in the short term, I need to talk to my lender to get my inputs for springtime. Well, that better be a short-term goal because springtime's going to be here in 3 months, right? So, and short term, we have 0 to 2 years, long term, 5 to 10 years. These are simply guidelines. There's no rocket science here. Like a lot of mortgages, that's a 30-year loan that you'll get your house paid for. So that's a 30-year goal saying, hey, in the next 30 years, I will have my house paid for. So that 5 to 10 years, the timeline doesn't mean much, but we just what are things that are short term and long term? I think it's in the farm transfer world, it's easier to think about your long term goals about, hey, I want this to be a successful farm transition to my son. And then think about short-term goals that will help accomplish your long-term goals. Again, make sure they don't conflict. If your long-term goal is to be debt-free, your short-term goals probably shouldn't be to go buy another 100 acres, right? Those are conflicting. So we want to make sure that these long-term, short-term goals coincide with each other and help the next goal get accomplished. Right? Management is a goal-directed activity, right? Your goals provide direction for your management efforts. And we just have a few sample goals here that I want to highlight, right? So a point in time, right? In 2 months, within 5 years. Action verbs. What is this goal going to do? Is it going to reduce debt? Increase efficiency, improve herd size, expand acres, right? What are we actually trying to do, right? We want to identify a change in, pesticide applications, right? We want to increase our yield, increase our attitude, and then how are you going to measure that? Right? Hey, I want to increase my yield from 180 bushel corn to 190 bushel corn in the next 3 years, right? Or I want to improve my balance sheet, right? I'm going to use my balance sheet, which can calculate our net worth. I want to increase my net worth by $50,000 each year for the next 3 years. But being specific here is helpful here. And we have this acronym. I don't even know who created this. I guess I stole it from somebody here, but it's a SMART goal. Specific, right? What actually is this goal going to be? Measurable. We want to make sure that we have a measurable outcome that's the intention of the goal. Just be saying, I want to increase my acres. Well, that's kind of measurable, but how much, right? If we plant 1 more acre of corn, I guess you can say you accomplished that. We want to have it measurable and yet impactful. And then attainable, right? We want to make sure these goals are realistic. Saying that you want to grow from 100 acres of corn to 3,000 acres of corn in 1 year, probably not attainable, right? If you want to say, I want to be a millionaire in the next 2 years. Well, that's potentially where you're starting from a really tough goal to get accomplished in that shorter time frame. So we want to make sure they're realistic. If we put goals that are unattainable, it really makes your next goal really tough to focus on because you get saddened by your unexpected or not achieving the goal can really down you, right? And that's kind of how we get some of these depression symptoms where it's like, man, I don't really even care anymore. I can't get my goals done. You need to make them attainable and also relevant, right? We don't want to say, well, my goal is to, I'm not even thinking of a good example here. We want to make sure that the goals are relevant to what we're discussing, right? For this farm transition world, maybe don't say, I want to go record a hip hop song. I don't know if that's relevant to the farming business, but we want to make sure these goals have some actual reality to them. And then time-based, again, putting a due date in there is important, right? Because if you just say, I want to make money, okay, right? That's just not specific enough. We want to say, I want to make an additional $50,000 in 2 years. Okay, and then some common goals to the farm transition world are tax implications, right? There's a lot of tax implications with selling assets from parents to children, right? Especially with farmland, where farmland has appreciated in value fairly significantly over the last 20 years. That's an expensive asset, both for the children to pay for, but the parents have to pay taxes on that. So we have to worry about what's the best case scenario of like selling stuff without paying Uncle Sam everything. And then some other common goals are protect assets from, right? Maybe it's crazy cousin Susie who moved to California. Maybe it's the nursing home, right? There are when people go to a nursing home because they can't take care of themselves anymore once they are like within in retirement and getting elderly, nursing homes aren't free. And I know specifically in Minnesota, if you are unable to pay your way in the nursing home, they will go after the assets you have and say, hey, you own $1 million worth of farmland. If you can't pay for your nursing home stay, the state will say you are forced to sell that farmland to pay for your nursing home, right? So there are some things that we need to be aware of and protecting assets from, again, nursing home, crazy family members, are things we need to worry or think about and be conscious of. And then ensuring the farm continues in the next generation, very common goal. Have retirement income. I like to talk about this that you can't sell everything and then sell everything cheap so that the next generation can afford to buy it, but then you as the older generation have no income. We need to have adequate income into retirement, right? Living in retirement is not free, right? Like just living in general, it's an expensive world we live in. And we need to be cautious and do some calculations on what planning looks like or what retirement income needs, right? Like with the older generation, they need to look at what their Social Security monthly check is going to be once they start drawing at, over 62, you can start drawing, right? What's that look like? Unfortunately, in the farming world, a lot of farms I talk with, they don't like to pay taxes, right? With their farm business management methodology, they try to reduce their income and pay limited taxes. Fine and dandy until we talk about Social Security checks. That's a pay as you go program. If you haven't paid much income tax over the last 30 years on the farm, your Social Security check might be smaller than you were anticipating. So be realistic here on what your retirement income sources are and what your actual expenditures are going to be on the family. And then be happy, right? That's a common goal. Be happy. Is this a good goal or not? I think people are going to have various answers. My answer is no, it's not a good goal because what does this mean? Right? What makes me happy and what makes Blake happy are probably two different things. We need to be more specific here with being happy, right? We have this beautiful ocean sunset picture, and maybe traveling is what makes me happy. Sure, I love to travel. That doesn't mean that everybody on the planet wants to travel to the ocean to be happy, right? So we need to be more specific on what being happy looks like. And here's just an example, right? During 2026, set aside $10,000 from asset sales to use for vacations during retirement. Take at least 1 week-long vacation as a couple starting this winter, right? So this has a little more meat in it than just simply being happy. Okay, think about long-term goals, then identify short-term goals to help make that a reality, right? So here's some other simple ones. Retiring generation buys a home in town by January, using revenues from selling intermediate assets. Intermediate assets are most likely going to be machinery and or livestock. Just kind of to make that clear that up here a little bit. And then the other one here, retiring generation buys life insurance policies at XYZ dollar amount by June for the non-farming children's inheritance. Okay, some life insurance policies are better than others. Just be cautious. Life insurance can be a good tool. It's not a good fit for everybody. Just a simple example we have. Couple more. One spouse will maintain off-farm employment that provides family health and dental insurance, as well as a salary of XYZ for the next 2 years. I know in Minnesota, we definitely have some expensive health insurance for self-employed individuals, right? I work for the University of Minnesota. They help pay for my health insurance as an employee. Farmers don't really have that same employer-employee relationship when they're self-employed. So it can be more expensive to buy it on the marketplace, right? There's a lot of factors that go into that, but having an off-farm employment by one spouse to get health insurance can be a pretty good option, right? The other one here, buy a combine, tractor, and the grain cart by the parents by July 1 here, get an appraisal on the equipment, and apply for FSA operating loans, right? So putting down where's the money coming from, right? Don't just say, I'm going to buy the tractor. Okay, and what dollar amount and where's that money coming from? Because a lot of people don't just have $200,000 sitting in the bank to go buy the tractor they want, right? That's just not typically how the farming world works. So again, what can we do? Right? Develop written farm and family goals that fit short and long-term personal and farm business objectives. Right? And hold yourself accountable here, putting down these due dates. I think these due dates are important about we need to say by June 1st, I'm going to start writing my will, right? If you say I'm going to start writing my will, well, that's easy to say, well, we'll do that after harvest. We'll do it before planting. It's easy to prolong things without a due date. And then job descriptions. These can be very, very helpful on the farm, right? We're going to have, for an example, right? We're going to have mom and dad, right, running the farm, and then they're having their son or daughter. Maybe it's son and daughter-in-law come in to help run the farm. What are each people going to be doing, right? What are the duties that need to be filled on the farm? What all needs to get done, right? Are we a livestock farm? I grew up on a dairy farm, so we have, young stock chores. We have a breeding like a breeding regiment on the farm on what our next, genetics on the farm are going to look like. We also have a crop option on the farm. We're raising crops to feed the cattle. We have cattle need to be fed every single day. So what about the milking herd? What's that ration team going to look like? So there's lots of different roles that need to be filled. Who is responsible for what? Okay. And what that looks like, we can say, what are each person's interests? We have mom and dad and son and daughter-in-law in my example. Who likes livestock? Who likes the crops? Who likes the record-keeping side of things, right? We have all this equipment to feed the cattle and plant the crops and harvest the crops. We need a mechanic, right? Who's maintaining the equipment? And then record keeping. We need to keep track of different expenses and income and expected, taxes, right? It's getting to be tax season here. Who is keeping track of that, right? Some of the record keeping thing, I think a lot of times on the farming world gets a little bit thrown to the side or forgotten about, where that's not always the number one aspect, right? A lot of times people want to be a farmer to run the tractors, to, maintain the livestock herd, not to be an accountant, right? They don't want to go work on their, inventory levels and their bank account records, right? That's not why they're a farmer, but it's an important aspect. If we don't keep a track of it, how do we know if we're doing good or bad? And then back to the job descriptions here. What's the time commitment for each of these different job duties on the farm, right? Maybe we need to feed the young calves on the farm. Well, that's 1 hour a day, right? It's not that hard. Maybe we got to talk about the crops. Well, it's very highly variable on what the time commitment looks like, right? Spring and fall, we're talking 100-hour weeks. And then in the winter months, it's a lot slower because nothing's growing because it's 20 below. Right? So we need to look at what that time commitment and how that realistically, who fills these roles, so everybody either has, a full-time job, maybe they want it 20 hours a week on the farm because they're working in town 40 hours a week and they can't work a full-time job on the farm. So understanding where people's roles fit on the farm is important. And then pay. Pay is an important factor, right? Again, especially as you start out on the farm, are you getting a salary or a wage where you're getting 15, 20, 25 bucks an hour? Where does that fit? What can the farm afford to pay? I'd love to pay everyone 50 bucks an hour, but if we can't afford to do that, we can't even start the discussion at that dollar point. And then finally, what are the expectations, right? If we put someone in charge of the young stock, okay, they're taking that role over from a parent. What do we expect that to look like? right? How do we know if they're doing a good job? What's our like performance review process looking like here? Where, hey, if we have a 2% death rate, if it's over 2%, hey, we need to look at this. We can't afford to be losing this many calves. Or is it with the crops, we need X amount of yield per acre to have this farm be realistically, expected output enough to feed our animals? All right, well, we need, 180 bushel corn. All right, when we get below that, what went wrong? Was it bad seed genetics? Was it a weather event? What happens and why did it happen, right? So having these expectations discussed before we just let, junior go is important. We can't say, all right, you're now in charge of breeding. Okay, like what does that look like? That's why job descriptions are important. And the owner, the older generation, the owners of the farm, they also need job descriptions, right? Just saying that, hey, I'm the CEO, I get to oversee everything. Okay, well, what does that mean? You're going to watch me feed the calves, right? We need to have duties and job descriptions written down here to help figure out what people are doing all day. Um, and my last big topic here that I want to spend about 10 minutes on, and this is a big issue with farm families that I work with, and this problem leads to a lot of inaction where they don't know what to do, so they do nothing. Okay, so the farming and the non-farming errors. So a lot of times in the farm transition world, I get to talk about death and what happens when you die off, right? The will doesn't do anything until you're dead, right? Like I encourage everybody to write a will, but in reality, I don't want my will to be known to the public for about, 50 years yet, right? Like, but we need to have this discussion. Okay, so the farming and non-farming heirs problem here is from the parents' generation, they own assets. They own farmland, they own machinery, they own cattle, they have a house, they might have a vacation home, they have retirement accounts, savings accounts, all of their assets. How are we going to split that between the farming and non-farming heirs, right? How do we give farming junior his share of the farmland while also taking into account I got 3 children who didn't take over the farm? If I give all the farming assets to farming junior, the non-farming siblings are going to be pissed off because they didn't get anything through an inheritance. And how do we keep this fair versus equal, right? A decision between equal and equitable needs to be made. So I have a silly example here that always when I share this with farm families, is a pretty good discussion. So we have a very simple example here. So we have mom and dad Johnson. They have 3 children, Mary, Frank, and Sam. Okay, they're adults. Like mom and dad in this story are like 80 years old. Okay, so they're getting elderly. Back in 1995, the farm, the family, like their net worth was $300,000. Okay, now, in 2025, mom and dad's farm is worth $3.3 million, right? So clearly they've expanded, it's grown, they've been successful, right? They've tenfolded the farm over the last 30 years. Great story, right? That's a good outcome and not unrealistic to, I'm more familiar with Midwestern agriculture, but not an unfamiliar situation. This is a pretty realistic example. Okay, so again, mom and dad, they're trying to get their will straightened out. They're unfortunately getting approaching their end of life. Okay, so they're worth 3.3 million bucks. They got 3 kids, 1.1 million apiece. That's equal, right? Each kid gets an equal share. Is this fair? Right? We don't have the whole story here, but in this example, Sam is the farming heir. He's been farming with mom and dad for the last 30 years. So starting in 1995, Sam like graduated college, came back to the farm, was a full-time farm employee for the last 30 years. Okay, Frank and Mary, they got a job in town. They grew up on the farm, but they didn't contribute labor-wise to the farm. They got no income from the farm, right? They had jobs in town. So now does it change the story, right? So we have, in this silly example, we have that Sam Starting in 1995, he was a 50-50 farm like owner with his parents owning the other half. So that 1995 $300,000 net worth, you split that up three ways. Each kid got $100,000 of 1995 net worth. Okay, we fast forward there, the $3 million of farm growth, one half of that is due to Sam. If it wasn't for Sam coming back to the farm, the parents would have sold this farm 25, 30 years ago. So half of that net worth of the farm growth and expansion is because of Sam. So he gets an additional $1.5 million worth of inheritance due to his, sweat equity in the farm and the farm's growth due to his involvement. And then at the end of the day here, there's $1.5 million left that the parents are worth. They split that up three ways, $500,000 each kid. So the Mary and Frank got the $500,000 of the 2025 dollars plus the $100,000 of the 1995 dollars, right? So that's their inheritance, and Sam got the majority. What do we think? Is this fair? Right? Typically, when I share this example with farm families, they say, yeah, this makes a lot of sense. Like Sam, with expanding the farm, he has, helped with sweat equity. He's put in labor, time, his own personal money into the expansion of the farm. He deserves more than Frank and Mary, who simply grew up on the farm and, go there once a month to see the family, but they have no labor contributions. They have no farm income from it. Right? So typically I share this. Most farm families agree with this. And my point is with everyone on the call, sharing something similar like this, I think is important. And when we have discussions with the Frank and Marys who say, hey, why am I getting 1/3 of Sam? Like, why do my parents love Sam 3 times more than me? We have to explain, hey, this is a business. We want the farm to continue. Sam has been putting in sweat equity. We have been paying him below market value to keep the farm profitable. And as a result of that, this is his like long-term, post-date employee check, right? Like this is his share of the farm labor that he's contributed. And if we did split up the farm like this previous example, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, Sam with owning 1/3 of the farm, it's really tough to make that a profitable, manageable, full-time farm moving forward. He just lost 2/3 of his acres, or he's going to have to buy 2/3 of his farmland from Frank or Mary, right? So just trying to highlight this. I know this story doesn't have a lot of background information, but I think it's a good starting point to just say, hey, it doesn't have to be equal. It has to be fair. And if it's not fair, that's when the children can get upset with the other children through the inheritance deals. And I think the parents have a duty to explain to the children why they split things up if it's not fair. It's really hard for Frank and Mary to ask mom and dad once they're dead why they did what they did. So if they can explain the why, we want the farm to continue. Sam has sweat equity. That's why he gets a bigger share. I think that'll help with some of the discussion moving forward. So fair might not be equal, right? Is it fair to distribute assets equally? Sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? Every farm family in this country is going to have a slightly different answer, right? There's no two farms identical. Only you know the answer for your farming situation and family. Communicating your wishes and plans can help reduce surprises. I will argue that the surprises are what people don't like. Typically, surprises are not well received unless it's a birthday present, right? Like they don't want to get, oh, I read the will, now I get nothing. That's not typically well received. So what's important to you? Family harmony? That's a big one, right? Fairness, preserving memories, right? What's important? Is it the farm continuation, right? We need to figure out our goals. So again, what values are most important to you and why? Can you communicate those values? Can you share that with your children or parents? Any values that have a large difference between how you and your heirs rank them, might be kind of a sticking point here, right? Like we just shared the values. If your children say, I don't care about like the farmland, like I just want to be your brother. I don't care about owning the farm. Like what are people's thoughts? We need to have this discussion. Can you reach a comfortable compromise here? And what can you do next? Utilize effective communication strategies to share your goals and the succession plan with the family and other relevant parties. Maybe it's more than just direct, your direct family members that want to be involved. Maybe you had cousins who came to the farm, every weekend as kids. Maybe they care what happens as well. So keeping people in the loop here is important. And you don't have to share with your non-farming heirs, your non-farming siblings, hey, this is my farm income this year. Right? You don't need to share everything, but some of these overarching goals about who owns assets, I think is important. Family communication between farming parties, it's very important to start that goal setting process. So the point is here, we need to talk about what our goals are, what we want to see happen on the farm. Start getting these goals figured out. Once we get our goals figured out, then we need to utilize the professionals. And I'm talking about the attorneys, the accountants, the transition experts. You are going to have to work with an accountant and an attorney to set up sales agreements, to set up some of this paperwork on, hey, I'm going to be selling XYZ acres to XYZ person. But don't go to the law office saying, hey, I want to create an LLC. Well, why? Like, what are you wanting to do with an LLC? You can go to the law office and say, hey, I want to bring in my son to the farming business. We want to create something that'll help with liability protection, right? Some of these business structures do have some personal liability protection. That can be a great tool. If you want to go to the law office and say, hey, I want to create a business plan or a business model to pay the least amount of taxes or to, own the most acres. Well, what are your goals? That is what we need to figure out and then communicate that final plan with all. That's the non-farming siblings. Maybe it's you need to work with your banker, all those different people that play a role on that. So again, with this, we need to figure out our goals, look at the financial statements and other important documents to say, hey, what's this farm look like in reality? Are we making money? If we haven't made money the last 5 years, it's really, really hard for son Bob to come in, right? It's really hard to bring in the next generation if we have not been making money. If the farm's not making money, the next generation is not going to be able to pay, for those assets from the parents while inheriting not profitable business. And then we're going to have to work with those professionals, the attorney, the accountants, who can help implement some mechanisms to make the plan that you created a reality. That's the slides I have. What questions do we have? I think there's about 10 minutes left here. I've worked in the farm transition world here with my job with the University of Minnesota for 6, 7 years here. So it's interesting getting a lot of different farmers' takes on this because I had one farmer that said this worked excellent, and the next farmer said, yeah, we heard about that, and it like did not work for us, right? So everybody is different, but I do want to highlight figuring out your overarching goals are really an important first step. Again, all too often farmers say, hey, I want to go to the law office and have them straighten it out. No, you need to tell the lawyer what you would like to see happen, and they will help make your goals a reality, but they're not going to make a business plan for you, right? Or if they do, it's going to get really, really expensive. So going to the professionals with a bunch of this stuff already drafted in place or your wishes predetermined is really beneficial.
Thank you very much. We do have some questions. I'm going to read to you, Nathan, in the chat, and then I also have a question myself. The first question is, what is your source, and can you share your source of the retirement plans that are out there, the data that you provided?
Oh, like the percentage that farmers
Yeah, the
didn't have a
wheels.
will and stuff. I'd have to double check. It is sourced. I will just have to double check what it is. I don't have it on top of my head. It's some form of like Midwest farm transfer survey that different groups have done. Like the Farm Bureau's done one, Farmers Union or something along the lines of there's a farm transition network that has done surveys. So it's one of those surveys is where it came from, but I can double check the source.
Okay. Um, Here is next question. How do you handle situations where one sibling returned to the farm right away, but another sibling did not return until they were off the farm for a number of years?
Yeah, that's a common situation too, where we have one who has 10 more years of sweat equity, I'll call it, right? So it's like that, I'll just say son, and, I'm trying to be gender neutral here, but that child, child one who came back to the farm right away, again, if they have 10 more years of sweat equity, they've probably gained some ownership of assets that child number two is kind of behind the eight ball on, right? And maybe child two had a high paying job in town where hey, I got a retirement account. I have a savings account that I can now buy assets, but they don't have the sweat equity built up that child one does. So there does need to be a consideration here of sweat equity built into place and what have we been paying child one versus child two. If we've been paying child one more or less nothing the 10 years before child two comes in, that's more sweat equity. If we've been paying child two a pretty generous salary because farming was profitable for that farm, then they maybe don't have as big of a difference in what the sweat equity is in over child two. So there's a lot of variables at play. But yes, that does need to be taken into account. Just the time, just the sheer amount of time that individual people have invested in the farm.
The next question is, how do you recruit or get farmers and ranchers to attend workshops like this?
So the way we do it in Minnesota, we have a couple different farm transition programs. We have kind of a one, like the one yesterday, it was a 6 hour workshop from like 10 to, I guess 5 hours is like 10 to 3, where we went over a whole bunch of the stuff in more detail. And we typically, advertise that through our extension channels, or like we'll have a local sponsor who'll pay for lunch for the group. Like yesterday, the Farm Bureau paid for lunch and they advertised through their channels, and we had 30 people at the door. I mean, we typically the farm transition discussion gets a pretty strong attendance in our world. And I know we do another similar program in Minnesota where we work with the another college institution and we kind of both promote it, we both teach part of it. And with that, we get about 40 people per workshop, 3, 4 times a year. So I think especially with the increase in farmland values the last 10 to 20 years where they've really increased significantly, that the farm's net worth have increased significantly with that. And it's a bigger sticky point on how to break up that fair versus equal. And the parents really wanted, like, they want to listen on what are some strategies to break this up. Because 20 years ago, the farm was worth 500,000. Now it's worth 5 million, right? We've again, that tenfold increase is not uncommon just with farmland values. That how do they distribute that equally? Where maybe they're like 10 years, 20 years ago, my non-farming kids, they didn't care. They're like, well, give me 50 grand inheritance and I'm happy. Again, now that 50 grand is transitioned to, well, the 1/4 of the farm is more equal to, $1 million, right? So they need to, um, it's a more pressing situation. At least in Minnesota, we haven't had much of a dilemma with getting people to come to the door.
Hey Nathan, I do want to say, like, from a state that doesn't have a lot of like succession planning uh, specialists or folks from the university, is there, it'll be harder to get folks to join a Zoom, come to a Zoom meeting or something and get, feel like they want to come to the meeting or whatever, because we're going to have to Zoom in people to help, teach those courses for us, like in Georgia. Are there any like toolkits or things that you would recommend for agents that might not have that specialist backing in their own states to use to do these in-person programs instead of having to do like a virtual or reach outside to bring in folks to speak?
We definitely do have a lot of these resources on our website. We're like, we have strategies. We have some of like the stuff I shared. Some of this is broken down like in a Word document and with bullet points on, hey, these are things you need to start thinking about. So there definitely is that. My one argument or counter argument here is, unfortunately, I've learned almost more working with farm families than any other like resource. Like I've gone to professional development specifically on farm transfer, but talking with farm families has almost gained me more knowledge because you hear, hey, we did this, it worked well. We did this, it didn't work well. Or like our accountant said this was the best strategy. Where there is a, you're in kind of a bad situation if you don't have someone who personally has had, dozens and dozens of conversations with farm families to share what they think is a good idea. Because again, farm families are so diverse in just the way their business models work, the size of families, all these different variables, and getting multiple ideas from multiple people, I think is really beneficial to me that unfortunately you just don't have. So I don't know if that's a great answer, but I think that's the reality of it.
Um, I have a question, and then we'll open it to the floor. We do have 5 minutes left. Um, if if siblings inherit a farm, in your last couple of statements was talking about LLCs and business plan and making money. If siblings inherit a farm and they're no longer farming, they're just bush hogging and cutting grass, is there need to do anything?
I would say yes, there's always a need to have a plan in place, right? If you let's just say that sibling one and two inherited 100 acres from the parents. Okay, well, what's their plan with that property? Is it like you said, Tyrone, they just want to hunt it in the fall or whatever and brush cut some trails? That can be a good plan. Is there an opportunity to make money on that land? Right? I do a lot of farm rentals talks in Minnesota where it's not uncommon for children to inherit the farmland from the parents and then rent it out. It's a cash cow for them, right? They inherited this property, not always debt free, but they inherited this property and now they get an income stream from it. So I think, Tyrone, it really depends on what the wishes are with that family. Is it an income generating resource? Is it just simply a hobby or like I said, a recreational property where we can hunt it and go zoom around with the four-wheeler and have a good time? And does the family want to keep it? Right? If they simply just got this 100 acres from the parents, now they live 500 miles away, they said, screw it. Just give me my couple hundred grand, let's sell and move on in life. Right? So I think the siblings who inherit that really do need to make a plan, right? They need to have a long-term goal in place. Again, do their children want it, right? Like it just I think there always needs to be a discussion of what they want this to look like moving forward. And the problem with that, or why it always needs to be ongoing, let's just say the siblings inherit it. All right, for the next year, let's keep it and figure it out. 2, 3, 4 years down the road, their plans might change, right? Do they want to own it together? Do they want to like split the property and just each own two halves? Right? Once we have these multiple property owners, it gets kind of complicated to make decisions. Let's say they throw it in a trust and then their kids are going to be in it. They all have one vote. Well, if now we have two siblings, each with two kids, well, now we got 6 people that have to agree on what to do with the property. So there does need to be a discussion of what they want to do with that farmland moving forward.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions from the audience or the floor? Okay. Now, great job. Let's give I guess a video audience or Zoom thank you. Definitely, we're looking forward to part two. I did learn a lot today. And so Farm Succession Part 2 will be February 25th at 1 o'clock. And look forward to hearing more about this. So with that, we thank you for everyone for attending, and you have a great day.
Thanks, everyone. Reach out to me if you got questions.